When I think back on that summer, the first image that comes to me isn't my aunt's house. It's the small coffee shop at the end of her street, quiet, slightly cramped, the kind of place where the same two ceiling fans hum all day without cooling anything. I went there because it was the only spot within walking distance, and because I didn't know what else to do with myself in a neighborhood that felt too still. The first morning, I sat by the window with a chipped mug of black coffee, scrolling through messages I never sent. My thumb hovered over names, half-typed thoughts. I'd backspace, lock the screen, then unlock it again just to stare at the same emptiness. That was my routine: fill time, keep the silence from swallowing me. She was behind the counter that day. Not the barista I expected. She was older, mid-40s maybe, with sleeves rolled up, hair tied back in a way that looked careless but deliberate at the same time. She glanced at me once, then again, like she was checking if I actually belonged there. "Refill?" she asked when she passed my table, voice low, steady. I hadn't even finished half. Still, I pushed the mug toward her. Yeah, sure. Thanks." She nodded. No smile, not yet. Just a nod and a quick glance, as if she wanted to read something on my face but chose not to. The next morning, she remembered my order. "Black, right?" she said before I even opened my mouth. I laughed, too quickly. "Yeah. Guess I'm predictable." "Most people are," she said, setting the cup down gently, her fingers brushing the rim like she was lining it up just so. That was how it started, small acknowledgments, not enough to call conversation. But every morning, I found myself arriving earlier, choosing the same seat, folding napkins into shapes without realizing until she came by and noticed. "You do that every day," she said once, nodding at the little square I'd pressed and repressed until the edges went soft. I looked at it, embarrassed. "Bad habit." "Not bad," she said. Then she walked away, leaving me stuck on the way she said it, quiet, almost distracted, but like she meant it. By the third week, I knew her hands better than her smile. The way she smoothed her apron when she thought no one was watching. The way her fingers tapped twice on the counter after ringing up someone's order. She didn't laugh often, but when a kid spilled cocoa and she bent to clean it, shaking her head, I caught the soft curve of her mouth before she straightened. I started noticing too much. The little scar on her wrist. The faint lines around her eyes. The way she paused before answering simple questions, as if she was sifting through words for something lighter than what she carried. Loneliness has a way of sharpening your attention. Mine made me careful, hesitant, like if I looked too long, she might notice and retreat. So I hid it behind casual lines, a dry joke about the fans never working, a shrug when she asked how long I'd be in town. One evening, just as she was closing up, I left my mug on the counter and said, "See you tomorrow." She looked at me then, really looked, not the passing kind of look she usually gave. Something in her eyes made me falter, like she wanted to ask something but didn't. I walked out before she could. Later that night, at my aunt's house, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. The message was simple: "Coffee's on me tomorrow." I stared at it for a long time, the room silent except for the ticking of my aunt's old clock. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but for once, I didn't type anything back. Not yet. The next morning, I walked into the cafe half convinced I'd imagined the text. She was already there behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair a little messy like she'd rushed. When she looked up, her eyes flicked toward me, then down to the register. "Coffee's on me today," she said flatly, sliding the mug over. I almost asked if she'd really sent the message. Instead, I just said, "Thanks," and sat in my usual spot, the napkin already between my fingers. For a while, neither of us moved beyond that. She wiped tables, adjusted the chalkboard menu that never changed. I scrolled through my phone, not really seeing anything. But then, as she passed by, she stopped at my table. "You're here every morning," she said, not accusing, just observing. "Not much else to do," I admitted. My aunt keeps the TV on too loud, and the house smells like mothballs. That made her laugh, low and brief. I know that smell. Something shifted then. She pulled out the chair across from me, just for a minute, apron still tied. I used to live with my grandmother, she said. Same smell. Same noise. Felt like the walls were too close, like you couldn't hear your own thoughts. I nodded. The way she said it, calm, almost offhand, made me picture her younger, maybe my age, sitting in some cramped house she couldn't escape. Did you get out? I asked quietly. She shrugged. Eventually. You always do. But sometimes I wonder if I ever really left. Her phone buzzed on the counter then, and she stood up quickly, almost too quickly, excusing herself. I watched her thumb swipe across the screen, her shoulders tense, the way she sighed before tucking it back into her pocket. Whoever it was, she didn't answer. That was the first time I felt the risk of it, whatever this was becoming. She was twice my age, maybe more. I caught myself wondering if she had kids. A husband. A life that I was only brushing against in the mornings, like a shadow. The thought should have cooled me, but instead it sharpened the way I noticed her. How she carried herself like someone used to being depended on. How she spoke carefully, as if words could break. Later that week, rain kept most people away. I was the only customer lingering. She brewed tea instead of coffee, sliding the cup across the counter. Something different, she said, almost like a dare. We sat in silence, steam rising between us. I wanted to tell her something real, something I never said out loud. Instead, what came out was, I don't know why I keep coming back here. Her gaze held mine longer than it should have. Maybe you do. The clock ticked too loud behind us. I sipped, not tasting anything, and folded the napkin into smaller and smaller squares until it nearly disappeared in my hand. When I stood to leave, she reached over to take the mug, and her fingers brushed mine. Just a second, light, casual, but it stayed with me longer than I could explain. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The rhythm of those mornings settled in. Coffee. A few words. Silence that wasn't empty anymore. But one morning, when I walked in, she wasn't behind the counter. Instead, a younger barista, cheerful, loud, asked for my order. I hesitated, almost left, then sat at my usual spot anyway. The girl gave me a bright smile, like I was just another customer. I stared at my phone. 5 minutes. 10. Then she appeared from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. Relief hit me before I could hide it. You're late, I said, softer than I meant to. Supply delivery, she replied, brushing it off. But her eyes lingered on me a moment longer than usual before she moved behind the counter. The younger barista caught it. I saw the way her glance shifted between us, quick and curious. I dropped my eyes to the napkin in my hand, folding it too sharply, pretending I didn't notice. That day, she didn't sit. She stayed busy, polishing the same spot on the counter. Every time she passed my table, I felt her pause, just slightly, like she was about to say something but stopped. Finally, when the other girl disappeared into the back, she leaned on the chair across from me. Not sitting, just close. You ever think you're wasting time? She asked suddenly. I blinked. All the time. She nodded, half smile, but her eyes gave her away. Tired. Guarded. Like she was testing how much she could admit. I wanted to ask why. Instead, I said, depends who you spend it with. That landed. Too direct. She looked down at her hands, tracing the rim of a coaster. Careful, she said. But it didn't sound like a warning. More like a plea. The bell over the door rang. A man walked in, mid-50s, suit, confident stride. He greeted her like he knew her well. She stiffened, then forced a smile. I sat there, invisible, while they spoke about something I couldn't catch. When he left, she didn't come over. She busied herself with cups, shoulders tense, avoiding my eyes. I should have gone. But when she finally turned toward me, the silence between us was heavier than before. She crossed the room slowly, pulled out the chair this time, and Saturday, I don't usually talk like this, she murmured, barely above the hum of the fans. I leaned forward before I realized it. With me? Her eyes flicked up, then down. With anyone. The air felt charged, like the space between us was thinner than it should be. I noticed the faint line of her jaw, the way her hand rested close to mine on the table. If I shifted an inch, we'd touch. I almost did. But then she stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. I should close up. I swallowed the words I wanted to say. She didn't look back as she walked away. That night, lying in the too small guest bed at my aunt's, I replayed it again and again, the way she almost leaned closer, the way I almost moved. Almost. It was late when I found her outside, leaning against the brick wall beside the cafe. The shop had been closed for an hour, lights off, but she lingered there, arms crossed, hair pulled loose from the tie. I almost walked past. Instead, I stopped. You smoke? She shook her head. Used to. Habit stayed, just without the cigarettes. I nodded, not sure what else to say. The night air was cool, faint hum of traffic in the distance. She glanced at me, then at the street. Why do you keep coming back? She asked finally. Her voice wasn't sharp, more tired curiosity, like she needed to know the answer before it slipped out of her reach. I hesitated. Because, it's different here. That's not an answer. I folded my hands, stared at the cracks in the sidewalk. Because you notice things. Most people don't. Her jaw tightened, but her eyes softened. You shouldn't say that. Why not? Because you're young, she murmured, almost to herself. You'll regret wasting time on someone like me. The words landed harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, closed it again. For a moment, all I could hear was the buzz of a street lamp flickering above us. I don't feel like I'm wasting anything, I said finally. That silence after, heavy, unguarded, felt like the most dangerous thing yet. She exhaled, long and shaky, and sat on the low bench near the wall. I joined her without asking, leaving just enough space between us that we weren't touching, but close enough to feel the heat of her shoulder. My son's your age, she said suddenly. I froze. That was the risk. The line I hadn't let myself imagine. She rubbed her palms together. He's away at school. Barely calls. And here I am, sitting outside with you. Her voice cracked on that last word. I looked at her then, really looked, the tired strength in her face, the guilt sitting right alongside something else, something harder to name. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered. Neither did I. My chest felt tight, like if I breathed wrong, the whole moment would collapse. Maybe you don't have to know. She turned toward me, eyes searching. For what, I couldn't tell, permission, forgiveness, maybe an excuse. My hand twitched against my knee, wanting to reach for hers. She noticed. And for a second, she didn't pull away. Then, she stood, sudden, like she'd remembered something urgent. I should go. I stayed seated, watching her retreat toward the door. Just before stepping inside, she stopped, looked back at me, lips parted as if to speak. But she didn't. And that silence, her not saying whatever it was, left me with a question I couldn't stop hearing. What if she wanted me to stop her? The next morning, she wasn't there. The younger barista, bright smile, loud voice, told me she'd taken the day off. I nodded like it didn't matter, but my hands kept tearing the napkin into thin strips, one after another. I stayed longer than I should have, pretending to read on my phone, waiting for a sign she might still walk through the door. She didn't. The following day, she was back. But different. Her hair was pinned neatly, her sleeves rolled low, her tone clipped. No pause in her movements, no glances in my direction. She didn't sit. She didn't ask questions. When I thanked her for the coffee, she just said, "Sure," and moved to the next customer. The distance stung more than I expected. I thought about asking if she was okay, but the younger barista hovered nearby, and something in her posture told me not to push. For the first time since I'd arrived at my aunt's, I skipped a morning. Stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. My phone buzzed with a text from a friend back home, just a meme, nothing important, and I almost replied, but couldn't. The words felt heavy, wrong. When I finally went back to the cafe 2 days later, she looked startled to see me. Relief flickered across her face, then disappeared under something cooler. "You weren't around," she said, arranging cups. "Thought maybe I should take a break," I answered. Her hand stilled for a second. "From what?" I almost said from you. Instead, from routine. Her mouth pressed into a line. She reached for a rag, wiping a spotless counter. Routine's safer than the alternative. I didn't know what that meant until I noticed the framed photo tucked behind the register, a boy in a graduation gown, arm around her shoulders. Her son. The one she'd mentioned. I stared too long. She noticed. "He doesn't call much," she said quietly, not looking at me. "But I can't blame him. I left his father when he was 12. Messed up enough times since then." I didn't know what to say. The truth pressed against my ribs, unspeakable. That she wasn't the only one who felt unmoored, suspended between choices. That maybe we were both using this place to hide from something else. But I stayed silent. That night, I typed a message on my phone, "I'm not here for coffee anymore." My thumb hovered over the send button. I stared at the words until they blurred, then deleted them, screen going dark in my hand. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next morning, her chair across from me stayed empty. And so did mine. It was raining the night I decided to walk past the cafe. Not inside, just past, on my way back from the store, carrying groceries I didn't really need. The windows were fogged, lights low. She was inside, alone, wiping down tables. I stood outside too long, debating whether to knock. Finally, I pushed the door open. The bell gave me away. She looked up, startled. Then her shoulders dropped, like she'd been bracing for someone else. "We're closed," she said softly. "I know." I set the bag of groceries on the counter, pulling out the extra tea I'd bought. "Thought you might want this." Her eyes flicked to the box, then back to me. She didn't move closer, but she didn't tell me to leave either. The rain tapped steadily on the glass, filling the silence. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," she admitted finally. Neither was I. Something shifted then. She untied her apron, set it aside, and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. For once, she looked tired without trying to hide it. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know." Her mouth curved, half a smile, half something else. "Then why are you?" I swallowed. My hands gripped the edge of the counter. "Because every time I think about leaving, it feels worse than staying." Her eyes closed briefly, like the words cost her something. When she opened them again, she met my gaze and didn't look away. "You're too young," she whispered. "Maybe," I said. "But I keep thinking, you're the only one who actually sees me." That silence again, heavier than anything either of us could say. She turned, walking to the nearest table, and sat down slowly, like the weight of the moment pressed against her bones. I joined her, setting the tea box between us. Neither of us touched it. I can't promise you anything, she said, voice thin, careful. I've already broken too many things. I'm not asking you to. Her hand rested flat on the table. Mine hovered near it, not quite touching. For a moment, the space between us felt like a question neither of us dared to answer. She let out a shaky laugh. Do you even know what you want? No, I said honestly. Just, not to forget this. Her eyes softened then, lines deepening around them. She reached out, finally, fingers brushing mine. Not a grasp, not a claim, just the lightest touch, enough to steady something inside me. Okay, she whispered. That was it. No promises. No dramatic ending. Just that one word, carrying everything we couldn't say out loud. And in the quiet cafe, with rain pressing against the glass, it felt like enough. By the time summer thinned into autumn, our routine had changed without either of us naming it. I didn't just sit by the window anymore. Sometimes I helped her wipe down tables before opening, sometimes we walked out together after closing. No declarations. No promises. Just presence. She still brewed my coffee black at 8:47 a.m., sliding it across the counter without a word, though now she lingered, sometimes sitting with me, sometimes letting the silence stretch until it felt like its own language. I still folded napkins, though less nervously. She teased me about it once, dryly, careful, you'll run out of corners to crease. I liked the way she said it, half smile, eyes steady, as if the fear of breaking something had eased, just enough. One afternoon, after the rush had gone, we sat outside on the same low bench where she once told me about her son. This time she leaned against me, shoulders barely touching. I didn't move, afraid to disturb the balance, but she stayed there anyway. He called yesterday, she said quietly. My son. I nodded, waiting. He asked if I was happy. I didn't know how to answer. She glanced at me then, eyes clear, searching. But I think I might be. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. I didn't reply right away. Just reached into the grocery bag I'd carried, another box of tea, a small ritual now, and placed it between us. She laughed under her breath, shaking her head, brushing her hand lightly against mine as she took it. In that moment, I realized we hadn't crossed some invisible line. We had just stopped needing to. Weeks passed. My aunt's television hummed in the background every night, the smell of mothballs still in the air, but I didn't mind as much. I had a reason to wake early, to walk down the quiet street, to sit at a table that no longer felt borrowed. It wasn't perfect. She had her days, pulled back, guarded, weighed down by things I couldn't touch. I had mine, uncertain, restless, wondering how long I could stretch this borrowed season. But when I sat across from her, sipping bitter coffee or sweet tea, I knew it mattered. That was enough. One morning, as we sat in silence, she reached over and smoothed the crumpled napkin I'd been folding into smaller and smaller squares. She pressed it flat with her palm, then left her hand there, covering mine. Okay, she asked softly. I met her eyes. Okay. That was all. I don't remember the exact words after, or even the weather that day. Just the hum of the fans overhead, the steady clock ticking toward 8:47, and the quiet certainty that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't paused anymore. I was here. With her. And that was enough.